Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Andy Henriquez. Andy is a keynote speaker, business storytelling coach, and founder of the Master Storyteller Academy. He trains corporations and entrepreneurs on how to unlock the power of story to elevate their brand, build greater connection, and increase revenue. Andy has been featured in the Huffington Post, Black Enterprise, and Entrepreneur magazines, and some of his past clients include Office Depot, Accenture, NASA, and Bacardi. As you'll find out today, Andy and I share a lot of things in common, but there's one thing we absolutely don't: our nicknames. While the legendary speaker Les Brown has nicknamed Andy the Great One, my two nicknames growing up were Couscous and Lame Joke. And these days, I'm lucky if my wife calls me anything at all, so an ego-boosting nickname is definitely out of the question. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great One, Andy Henriquez. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Francisco, thank you so much, man. I have been looking forward to spending this time with you and your amazing audience, man. I love the fact that you have such a passion for storytelling, and I know that this is an area that you help so many of your clients with, and so it's always great to connect with somebody who does the same type of meaningful work, and so I'm excited, man. Just happy to be here. Couscous.
I'm leaving that one in the past. And
all right.
Maybe I shouldn't have brought it back.
Yeah, we'll leave that nickname in the past, man.
When I started looking into your stuff, one of the things that hit me was how, in many ways, our sort of our origin story is similar, because I grew up as a big nerd. I loved superheroes, and I was the worst kind of nerd. I played Dungeons and Dragons. And that's when you know that I had no girlfriends growing up. But I sort of wanted a lot of adventure and excitement in my life. Ended up a financial advisor, and I know you share a boring job in your past as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's funny, but Francisco. My parents are originally from the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. They're from Haiti. And, my parents coming here as immigrants to the United States, they really wanted me to become successful. And so one of the things that they were telling me over and over again, they were like, listen, the key to success is you got to go to school, you got to get a good job and get a good education. So I took their advice to heart. Like, I was a really great student, focused really hard. I ended up going to Florida State University. I got my undergraduate degree in accounting and actually graduated summa cum laude. So that's like a fancy way of saying I spent way too much time studying when I probably should have been hanging out with some friends. And I got my undergraduate degree in accounting, out of all things. And then I stayed and I got my master's degree in corporate accounting. And there was a group of us, we were pretty insane. Like, we decided to study for the CPA exam, and we took the CPA exam and I passed it. And I was working with this really amazing company, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Every reason to do well, every reason to be happy, but yet and still, Francisco, you could probably relate to this. I was waking up every single day and saying, oh my goodness, like, there has got to be more than this. And the reason why is, like, I was waking up every day to the sound of an alarm clock. I'm jumping out of my bed. I'm getting in my car. I'm fighting traffic to get to a place in which I knew that something inside me was saying, Andy, there's got to be more than this. And I bet that there's some people who are listening right now that you have showed up to a job, a set of circumstances, and you've been saying to yourself, like, there has got to be more than this, or you've been there in the past. And Francisco, for about a year and a half, man, I thought about taking a chance on myself. I thought about becoming an entrepreneur. I thought about becoming, a speaker, a coach. But here's what I did for about a year and a half, man. I would talk myself into it and then talk myself right back out of it. I talk myself into it, be like, come on, man, you could do it. You could become an entrepreneur. You could become a speaker. You could become a coach. And then another part of me would be like, but you did spend a lot of time getting your undergraduate degree in accounting. You studied really, really hard to pass that CPA exam. Man, you spent a lot of time doing the things that you're doing right now, man. And this is a good job. Like, your mom's really, really proud of you. And so for me, man, finally December of 2004 became what I like to refer to as a defining moment. And Kevin Costner has a line in the movie I always like to bring up. And one of his lines he says is, when the defining moment comes, either you define the moment or the moment defines you. That became my defining moment because that's when I decided to step out on faith, even though I was afraid, even though I didn't know exactly what the game plan was, to sort of go down this path and this journey of entrepreneurship and trying to figure out what my purpose and my calling was. And so I'm hoping if somebody's sort of listening in right now, and if they're at that place that you were at, Francisco, that I was at, that they would be bold enough and willing enough to sort of step out on fear and move out really on faith and do it afraid, do it anyway, and hopefully get out there and eventually figure out what your purpose and calling is. And then now today, it's a blessing. As you said, Francisco, I get to work with, major corporations, companies like Bacardi, Office Depot, Accenture. I did a training just a couple weeks ago for Google for literally for 3 separate continents. I did training for their US market, their Europe market, and their Asian market. And I almost have to pinch myself. And I realized that the only reason why I get to do that is because of the fact that I was willing to do it afraid. I was willing to step out on faith. But one of the things that I love is, in addition to those corporations, is working with individuals, like the people who are coaches, the people who are speakers, the people who are entrepreneurs, who are trying to gain some traction, or they're just trying to up-level their game, and they want to get better at leveraging and sharing stories, man. And so that's why I'm a big fan of your work, Francisco, and why I'm so excited to be here talking to your audience, man.
So let me pick you up on something you were describing your story. What was the, to use a term very well known in story and a term I know you like, what inciting incident or the inciting conflict? So you had all that time, but at some point you decided to do it. I'll tell you mine, but what was yours?
Yeah. So here's what was interesting, right? So as I was an accountant, but specifically I was working as an auditor. All right. And so it's not uncommon for those of us that were auditing clients. We go to the client site physically, and we are asking the clients for their records, their statements, so that we can prepare their financial statements. And what typically happens is we're working at the client site late in the evening. And so we're working at a client site. It's pretty late in the evening, and I'm sitting there with about 3 of my counterparts. And as we're sitting there, I've got like a senior manager. They're all been at the company longer than me. They're all at a higher position. And they start talking about all the things that they wanted to do. So one of them said that they always wanted to sort of open up a restaurant. There's another one that said that they always wanted to, be like a professional artist. There was another one that I believe said that they wanted to travel internationally and travel the world. And I listened to everyone say what they wanted to do, and I asked them why they weren't doing it. And they just kept saying, well, I'm working, and every year I say I'm going to do it. But then I get a promotion, and then I'm working here. Then now it's harder and harder to leave. And so what I realized is, like, they were sort of like telecasting for me and allowing me to see the future. And I was like, if I don't do something right now, if I don't do something radical, I am going to be several years removed, basically saying the exact same thing that they're talking about how I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, a speaker, and a coach. And I didn't do it because now I'm working, I got promoted, and I've been here. And I would find myself saying, what if I would have taken a chance on myself? What if I would have decided to do something? And for me, it was like a blessing in disguise, because they showed me what my future would look like if I didn't do something radical. And so I remember I wrote up my letter of resignation, and I was sitting on it. I was so nervous, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And the crazy thing is, when I finally built the courage, it was right around promotions, and I actually got promoted. So of course that made it even more difficult. But then I kept remembering that conversation with them, and I said, you know what, Andy, if you don't do it now, then you're never going to do it. And that's when I finally turned in my letter of resignation. I was afraid, didn't have a set game plan. But that was the inciting conflict, right? Was looking at them and realizing that they were basically showing me what my future was going to be if I didn't do something different and something radical in that moment.
It
But
was your
Francisco, you said you're going to tell me about yours, man. I'd love to hear it.
yeah. So I was a financial advisor, and it was a very good job, and I made good money. I had, after many years apart, I had married my high school sweetheart. We moved to Barcelona. We had a kid. Life was pretty good. But the job was boring, You're not very excited about making rich people richer necessarily, and looking at spreadsheets all day. And I only really felt excited when I was on stage sharing stories, because I had gotten into public speaking. And one of my friends, Peter, who got me into public speaking, he would come to me and say, "You're pretty good at this thing. Don't you want to maybe take this professionally?" And I was like, "I don't want to rock the boat. It's all good, man. I don't want. It's fine." And then I remember this was 2016. My 2017, my kid was, I think, 1. And my wife and I were woken up in the middle of the night by some loud noises downstairs. And it genuinely sounded like someone was breaking into the house. So she got up and ran to my kid's room. And I got up and said, "Well, I guess I have to go downstairs and, I don't know, see face this burglar." And I started looking for some sort of weapon, and I didn't have anything. I went into the bathroom and thought, "Well, I can get the toilet cleaner." But I was like, no burglar deserves that. So I walked downstairs, and just before I'm about to push open the door of the kitchen and go in, my life sort of flashed before my eyes. And I didn't dwell on it because I was about to go in and see what the hell was going on. But later I started thinking about it, and I wasn't too happy with what I'd seen. I thought this is not, if I'm going out to face a burglar and this is the end of me, I don't want that this was all there was to it. So I went into the kitchen, and there was no one there. But I could still hear the noises, and I realized that the noises were coming from under the sink in the kitchen. I opened the door of the kitchen sink, and it was a gigantic black rat inside. So I closed the door, terrified, walked back upstairs, and this shows you how little I understand women, that I said to my wife, "There's nothing to worry about. It's just a huge rat."
That is hilarious, man.
So that's what got the thought in my mind. Is I kept coming back to that moment and thinking, there's got to be more than this, as you said. And I only really got pushed over the edge when my wife and I were surprised by getting pregnant with a second child. Because even though we're adults and should know better, clearly I don't know how these things work. And then I just realized, I'm almost 40. I have a good job. I have a wife. I have 2 children. Is this it? Is this life for now until the end of days? And that's when I got over the line and said, okay, no, I have to do something about this. And that's when I got started.
And absolutely love it. Yeah. So that probably wasn't the best line. Just it's okay, honey. It's just a big rat in the house. But you know what? I'll take a rat over a burglar any day of the week.
Yes, indeed. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, because I know a lot of your focus is on finding people's signature stories. So, and I've heard you talk a lot about this, but because everybody has, they don't think they have stories, but they have plenty of stories. So what is the thing you're looking for when you're trying to find the one story that's going to work for that person? Because there's so many you can generally pick from. What makes the alarm bell go in your head, go, bang, I found it. That's the one. What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we got to sort of define what a signature story is for everybody who's listening in.
Good point.
So when we think about a signature story, the way that I define a signature story is, this is the story that, whether you are an entrepreneur, a speaker, a coach, this is a story that you leverage so that you can really create like a genuine connection between yourself and the people that you're looking to connect with and actually influence. For most of us, even if you have a product, you have a service or something that you want to offer people, you've got to have something that is going to attract that person and make them actually want to work with you, right? And typically that signature story is the story that you're going to lead with that allows your ideal customer, your ideal client to say, my goodness, this is the person that I feel a connection to that makes me actually want to work with them, right? But to your question, Francisco, one of the things that people ask all the time, I've got so many questions. And so out of all these questions, how am I supposed to know which one is my signature story? So one of the things that we like to start off with is we like to start off by first just trying to figure out who is the audience that you're looking to connect to. Like, who do you most envision yourself actually speaking to? That's one of those things that's super, super critical. Is who you're actually envisioning.
The painters are throwing you off your game.
Oh my goodness. I love it.
You're a seasoned speaker, Andy. This talking with no interruptions is
man. I love it. You
need hecklers.
I absolutely love it. So they're right outside the room, and so one of the things we have to be thinking about is we got to be thinking about who do we actually want to connect with? Who do we intend to connect with? And this signature story is the story that we use so that we can connect with our ideal customer and our ideal client. That's the story that oftentimes we're going to lead with. And if we can lead with this story, then everything begins to change and begin to shift. But the question that's asked so often, Francisco, is how am I supposed to know out of all of the stories that I have, how am I supposed to know which one is my signature story? So typically I start off with a 3-part framework. And I've had the opportunity to use this framework in front of audiences of hundreds of people, in front of audiences of thousands of people, and then even working with people one-on-one. And every single time, this leads us to being able to find and develop what is known as their signature story. And so there are 3 places that we want to start off looking when we're trying to identify what our signature story is. So one of the things that I have them often focus on, Francisco, is number 1, what are your significant challenges? Like, what are the significant challenges that you have faced or that you have been through in your life? What are the significant challenges? Most of us have gone through some challenges. Some of you, as you're listening right now, you've been through a financial challenge. Maybe perhaps you've been through a relationship challenge. Some of you have been through a health challenge. If you look back at those significant challenges that you've been through in your life, chances are you have a story there. And it's not just a story that makes sense to you, but if you were able to actually extract the lesson from that challenge. Somebody once said, when you lose, don't lose the lesson. Oftentimes that is going to contain with it a powerful story that the people that you're looking to connect with, the people that you're looking to attract, it's a story that they're going to be able to relate to and identify with. Why? Because we've all experienced challenges in our lives. And especially for those of us that are looking to work with our ideal customer and client, if that challenge is something that you used to face and that you were able to overcome, that you know that your ideal customer and client is currently facing right now. So challenges is one of the places that I always direct people to look. The second place that I always tell them to look is, I want you to think about this, and that is, what was that defining moment? You know, we think about the story you just shared earlier, Francisco. Yeah, you know, it's just some loud noise down there. But in some ways, it was sort of like a defining moment, because with you sort of like having to think about your own life, right? The defining moment, the way that I categorize that, it's the moment that you look at your life and there was the before that moment, and then there was the after that moment, right? The before that moment and then the after that moment. When you look back at any defining moments in your life, you're normally going to find a very powerful, powerful story for you to share. And those are the moments that the trajectory of your life changed. And most people are seeking that breakthrough that you encountered at that defining moment. Most people are looking for a massive change in their lives. They want things to go in a different direction. So challenges, defining moments, and then the third is what I refer to as your major transitions. You know, we've all been through transitions in life. Some of you who are listening in, at one point you were married, and then now you got divorced, you're single now. Some of you were working a 9 to 5, and then now you become an entrepreneur. Those are all transitions. But then the real question becomes when we talk about transitions is this, all right? It's great to have a transition, but what about those major transitions? Those transitions normally have a powerful story. And especially for anyone who's listening in right now, if you're a coach or a consultant, or you help people who are earlier on in the process than you, the story around a transition allows you to say, hey, look, I know what it's like to be where you're at. I know what it's like to struggle my finances, to want to get in better health, to want happier, more fulfilling relationships, to make more money, whatever it is that you help people do. But now you get to identify with them with where they're at. Look, I know what it's like to struggle, but this is what I figured out, and this is how I got there, right? And so that story about a transition ends up being the perfect story. So here's what I find. When we're looking for that signature story, we're looking for the story that is going to relate with people, that is going to help us to connect with them, and we are wanting our story to be a story that they can see themselves in the story. In other words, that they could see part of their story within our story. And as a result of that, then they feel they lean in a little more and they start saying, you know what, man, there's something about this Francisco guy. There's something about Andy I feel a connection to. So now, therefore, I feel some type of a connection. I would love to learn more about them, right? And that's what we're wanting to do in the signature story, is give people something to connect to. So that way it buys us more time to possibly be able to work with them, to connect with them, and to have them actually make a decision that they want to work with us, you know?
So one question that I see a lot of people that are not that used to telling stories struggling with is when exactly you drop that signature story. Because if you're a speaker, that's a pretty straightforward one. You are given the time and the stage to do it. If you're doing any type of presentation, that's easy. You can build that in. But is there a moment? How would you advise people to use it outside the? If it's not a stage, if it's not a presentation you're doing. At what point is just like, listen, after they say hi is not the moment to drop your your 5-minute long signature story?
Yeah, so here's what's interesting, man. One of the things that I do advise, though, is for anyone who's looking to connect, we want to find opportunities. So let's think about this for the everyday person, right? All these different scenarios. The everyday person, maybe they're just going to be one-on-one with a potential client. And instead of just getting right into whatever it is you're trying to sell that client, it would help you. Do you think that someone is more inclined to buy from you if they feel some type of a connection with you? So you'll find people who are really great at sales and enrollment take the time to connect with people first, share part of their story so that they can build connection and rapport before they pivot onto whatever it is that they actually have to offer. So that's something. The other thing is we're in the age of social media, right? So for anybody who you're listening in and you're like, hey, I'm going to go live on LinkedIn, I'm going to go live on Facebook, on Instagram, or even if you're on the new social media platform right now called Clubhouse, and what you're looking to do is you're looking to connect with people who don't really know you. When you're going to go live, even no matter what it is that you're going to talk to, it always sort of helps if you know that there are people who don't know you in the audience to find a way to interject and find a way to bring in a piece of your story. You'll see even here when Francisco brought me in to have this discussion with all of you, you have to think about it. He wisely was like, hey, Andy, tell us a little bit, about, your story and so forth. Why are we doing that? Because, yeah, we might be talking about storytelling, dropping gems, and we could get great right into content, but you're more inclined to lean in and listen and get value from me if you felt some level of connection. And me just sharing my story, there are so many ways you could connect. Number one, if like your family are immigrants, you find a connection point there, right? If for people who are listening, you went to Florida State University, you find a connection there, right? If you're an accounting major, you find a connection there, right? But here's the other thing. The real connection when I tell that story is, have you ever been at a place in your life where you said, there's got to be more than this? And so the reason why I put that line in there is because I know that even if you can't connect with being an accountant, working as an auditor, or any of the other things I share, the one thing for sure is that we are all human beings are wanting more. And you probably have been at a place in your life where you say, man, you know what? I surely wish that there was more to life than this. I wish that there was more in this relationship, in this job, and so forth. And so the mere fact of me sharing that, it gives people an opportunity to connect. Now that you feel a level of connection, you're more inclined to stick around and listen to what has to be said during our conversation here. And so we want to find opportunities. So my students ask me all the time, how often should I be telling my story? And I say as many times as possible. And they say, well, what if I get tired of sharing the story? I said, well, tell it again. And they said, well, what if I get really tired? I said, tell it again, because there's always going to be new people to your audience. There's always going to be people who don't know you, and they need to feel some level of a connection so that they're willing to lean in and so that they're going to stick around. So true influence is going to come as a result of you taking the time to actually connect with people. And the fastest way for you to connect with people is by leveraging your story, whether it's casually, whether it's on the stage, whether it's on a virtual presentation, whether it's in a podcast, whether it's on a television interview. We always want to find a way to interject and bring in our story so that we can build a connection and rapport with people.
Yeah, I think that concern that you just shared about, is what if I get tired of telling it? I think that people that have done any speaking or any type of performance work realize that that's kind of nonsense, because, and I don't know if you feel the exact same way I do, but when I'm working on new material, the worst part is working on the material. Once I know the material and I've done it a few times and I know what parts work well, what parts I need to tweak, you're on stage or you're sharing that story, and then you can completely forget what the material is because it just comes so naturally. And then you go, okay, the audience is a bit cold. Maybe I don't want to drop this funny part of the story now. I'm going to push that a bit later. And then you sort of just playing with the energy of the audience. The last thing on my mind is, oh, I'm going to have to say this line for the 100th time in the last month. That is not a problem. And for me, it is not a problem at all. There is no boredom of story I've shared many. I enjoy it more because there's no thought that goes into it at that point.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? That's part of why we do the work and why I encourage even the everyday person, even if they're not a professional speaker, we want to create that story library. We want to develop stories that we're going to use, and that anytime we need to, we can sort of pull those stories out because we know they're going to be great at helping us to land a point. We know that those stories are going to be great to help us to build rapport. We know that those stories are going to help us to become memorable so that people can actually remember the things that we shared. And I think that everybody, whether you're a professional speaker or not, you will in fact benefit from being a better communicator and being a better storyteller. And so we should be intentional about observing life, trying to figure out where we could pull these stories and then develop these stories so that we can leverage these stories over and over again every single time that we need them. We're trying to make a point, or we're really looking to connect and enroll people into our vision, into our cause, into our products, into our services, or into yourself personally. Because if you can get them to connect with you, then we know we're more inclined to be able to influence them in the future to want to do business with us, to be a part of our tribe, to be a part of our community. I think it was Bob Berg that I first heard say that people love to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. But I always pose the question to people, how they get to know you, how they get to trust you, and how they get to like you, right? They get to know, like, and trust you through your story. It's the reason why we can get in the presence of a complete stranger, take the time to open up, share some dialogue, share our stories. And then now all of a sudden, we don't feel like we're strangers anymore. Now all of a sudden, we feel like there's a connection there. And that connection just becomes an absolute game changer for us.
Yeah, this is a point that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, which is it's the most natural thing in the world that when you had, let's say, a great meeting and you're considering taking on a product or service or hiring anyone, there's always either someone, a friend or a partner or a voice in the back of your mind that's going to go, but who is this person again? And then is when you go and look up the company, or you look them up, or you actually go on LinkedIn and check their profile, because if you haven't been able to say, no, I know Andy. Andy's a great guy, and you can tell whoever is questioning you all those things about Andy. You don't know that person, and unless you answer that question of who this person is, you typically are not going to feel confident doing business with them. And the story is in many ways a shortcut between two people. And that 5 minute story might allow me to know you more than perhaps I would have known you by working casually with you for months or years, as is the case with many companies. And I wanted to pick up on something else. You talked about many different types of stories. Now, we talked about the signature story, and I've seen you talk about 5 different types of stories. I believe you use the acronym SOLVE, right? So it would be the signature story, the offer story, the lending story, the value story, and the expert story. So I wanted to just ask you about some of them. So signature we covered. So the offer one is one. Maybe this is the one I've seen a lot of people call the value one, or the client story. Is that correct? Is the offer one a very client focused story?
Yeah, so it can be. So the way I like to really just define an offer story, in the framework and the way that I teach it, is that we think about this for all of us. At some point, we're going to be making offers, right? We're offering our products, we're offering our services. In addition to offering our products and our services, we might even just be offering people to support our cause, our movement. If you're listening right now, you got a nonprofit or you've got a ministry or something. So we all are going to make some type of an offer, whether we're offering our products or services, or we're offering for people to come in and actually support us. But we have to think about this, that even when we make offers, that there's going to be specific reasons that we know where people choose not to move forward on those offers. We've seen it over and over again. And if I were to ask you right now, what are some of the common objections to why people don't move forward on your offers? Most of us would be able to list some common objectives, right? Sometimes we know they're going to say, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, or they didn't see the value. So what is an offer story? The way I define an offer story, it's a story that we share that allows us to do 3 things. Either A, to get people to see the value, right? It's to just get them to see the value of our products and our services. Because sometimes people don't take action, sometimes they don't buy, because they flat out just did not understand nor see the value of what we have to offer. And so how sad is it that somebody should buy your products or your services or should support you, but we didn't do a clear enough job for them to see the value? So an offer story would be a story that we share so they can see the value. The other thing is an offer story helps us to overcome objections. So the fact that we know what the potential objections are, we can use the offer story to tackle some of those objections that we know that people are going to have, right? Whether they're going to say that I don't have the time, I don't have the money. What if you shared a story that allowed you to address that objection that the person has? Maybe you're going to share about another client who also said that they were limited on funds and find a way to figure it out and get the resources. Maybe you're going to share a story about somebody else who said they didn't have the time and somehow they managed to make the time. But it's just you thinking about what the objection is and then coming up with a story that addresses the objection. And then the final thing, and this is one of those things that's really, really critical, is creating a sense of urgency. Because oftentimes people don't take action when they should because we haven't created enough of a sense of urgency. There's something called the Law of Diminishing Intent. And that is when someone intends to do something and they don't do the thing that they were intended to do. They don't do the thing that they were intended to do. The longer that they take to do it, the greater the likelihood that they won't do it. So sometimes we use the offer story so that we can create a sense of urgency. It's a story to get people to understand why they have to take action right now. Not delay till next week, not delay till next month, but take action right now in this present moment. Because if they take action right now, there's going to be a reward or there's going to be great pain if they don't. So the offer story does not necessarily have to do all 3 of those things, but at least do one of those things. Get someone to see the value, overcome the objections, or create a sense of urgency. And what is the ultimate intent of the offer story? So that more people say yes to your offer. It's to increase conversion. It's to get your ideal customer, your ideal client, your potential donor, whoever it might be, to say yes, right? Because you've gotten them to see the value, you overcame their objections, and you created a sense of urgency so that they can take action. So that's how I define the offer story. And I believe that for anybody who's making offers, that they should take the time to develop some powerful offer stories that can help them to increase conversion.
When you started talking about the law of diminishing intent, I started thinking of most marriages where there's plenty of things you intend to do right at the beginning of the marriage, and then it starts going down slowly over time. All right, okay, so that was the offer story. We touched it. Um, Now, I don't want to go into all of them, but one that I think was interesting because I can see how people can fall into a trap there is the what you call the expert story. So I think the trap would be you're just telling some sort of self-aggrandizing tale that shows how amazing you are, and that one can easily backfire because, as people say, you don't want to make yourself the hero of your own story if you're the one telling it. So what do you think works well as an expert story?
What's interesting is we think about this, most people when they're trying to position themselves as an expert, they have a tendency to just really just try to list their accolades, right? I've done this, I've gotten this degree, I've been doing this for this long, and that's great. The only problem with that is that you are telling the audience that you are the expert, right? And you're just simply listing accolades or reading off your bio. And one of the things that I love to share all the time is the reality is nobody really cares about your bio. I mean, ask any professional speaker when they're backstage, they're peeping around the curtain, they're looking out at the audience, and they are watching their bio being read. If you watch the audience, most of the audience is not really paying attention to your bio, right? And the reality of it is, if we just want them to read our bio, they could go to your website, they could just look at your LinkedIn profile, whatever it might be. But we have to be thinking about, we're talking about real true influence. And real true influence would be, as opposed to you telling somebody you're the expert, real influence would be them coming to the conclusion themselves that you're the expert. So an expert story is a story that we put together and we craft. And as a result of us sharing the story, the audience, our potential customers, our client, they come to the conclusion themselves that we must be the expert. Because perhaps in that story, we end up highlighting, the struggle and the pains that we went through, how we overcame the pain, the amount of money and resources we spent to learn the skill, the amount of coaching that we have spent, right? Or the results that we've produced in our own lives, or results that we produce in other people's lives. But it's a story that we share. So to give you a little quick example, one of my clients, he ended up selling on Amazon. And when we were crafting his expert story, what we did is we talked about his journey. He first started off saying he was going to sell on Amazon. He started off with just a couple $100. He thought it was going to be simple. I just buy stuff and I sell on Amazon. When he first started off, it was terrible. He violated every rule on Amazon. He got his account shut down and suspended multiple times. He was sitting on inventory in his house, and he was devastated, right? Because he wasn't making any money. And then he completely forgot that he also needed to ship these products, and he thought that people would just buy it. It was a nightmare. But then finally he was realizing he can't do it on his own. So he decided to get coaching and mentorship. He goes to an event, and then he finds out about this amazing mastermind program, and he enrolls in this program, and then he ends up learning about fulfillment. He ends up learning that, wait a second, I don't have to hold inventory here. Amazon could ship this stuff out. He ends up learning how to make sure people see his products. And then now everything begins to shift and change, because now he's collecting money for products, and then he goes and buy it, where before he was buying the product first. And so what happens is when he shares that story, and then he ends it by saying, and today I'm so grateful that by implementing these things, I'm in the top 10 percentile of Amazon sellers, and there's over 2 million sellers on Amazon. What happens is when he's done telling that story, he doesn't have to go tell the audience he's an expert. Because when he's sitting on a panel, he shares that story. People come to him afterwards and hey, can I talk to you? Can I pick your brain? I want to ask you a question. Why? He didn't say he was an expert. He shared his story. But he shared it in a way where you could see the trials, you could see what he had to go through, you see all the things he had to do. And then now you, as the listener, you've come to the conclusion themselves, man, this guy knows more than I do. He's probably an expert based off of what I heard. Let me seek him out to find out what else I can learn from him. Does he have any coaching, or is there anything I could actually do? And so that is the power of the expert story. It's a story that you share, and the person just thinks they're listening to a story. But what's happening is the story is completely positioning you so that they can connect, but then also positioning you so that they could say, wow, you're an expert. You know more than I do. perhaps I need to see if there's anything you could teach me.
So I guess that's the one where I'll eventually be able to drop the fact that I've now read, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of storytelling experts of all kinds and read dozens, coming up to hundreds of books while I was preparing for these interviews. Okay, cool, that makes sense. Something else that I wanted to ask you to talk about is it's a really cool concept. It's really obvious in a way, but I don't think I've heard anyone else talk about it, which was this intersection between learning to tell your story or your stories and how that allows you to use your time a lot better. And to me, it was one of those moments. It's like, maybe I knew that, but I didn't really, and I hadn't really seen anyone put it the way you did it. So I just wanted you to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for all of us, it doesn't matter how much success you're having in this moment. If you wanted to reach more people and have even more success, one of the things that you have to constantly be trying to figure out is how can you maximize your time, right? Because that is the one thing that it doesn't matter what your nationality is, doesn't matter what your race is, doesn't matter about how much money's in your bank account. We all get the same 24 hours in a day. And so if you are the best salesman or saleswoman on the planet, and you are having one-on-one sales conversations, and you convert 2 out of every 3 sales conversations, even a mediocre salesperson can outperform you if instead of speaking to one person at a time, they are doing a sales presentation to 20, 50, 100 people at a time. And so that is one of the best ways for us to be able to leverage our time, is to get out of the hole of just having one-to-one conversations, but rather having one-to-many conversations. But then the question becomes, we get that conceptually, but why is it that most of us do not seize those opportunities to do one-to-many conversations? Why don't more of us start our own podcast? Why don't more of us do Facebook Lives, LinkedIn Lives, IG Lives? Why don't more of us open up a room and go live in Clubhouse? Why don't more of us find opportunities to get in front of live audiences? And when I ask people that question, the number one thing that comes up is fear, right? It's the fear of judgment, the fear of criticism, the fear, and also the fear of what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't know what to say? And so one of the things that's really important is, I believe that one of the things that boosts your confidence level is when you've taken the time to develop these stories and you've tested these stories. You know they connect, you know they resonate. And then now you have these stories, and think about how much more confidence you have because you have these stories ready and accessible to you. And I always ask people, what would you begin to do more of if you did have a powerful, compelling story, if you did have a powerful, compelling message, and you knew that it resonated with people because you had been sharing it over and over again? What would you do more of? And Francisco, like clockwork, man, they start listing off, oh, I would start my own podcast. I would write my book. I would, get in front of more people. I would do presentations. I would do my own webinars and so forth. And the question is, well, why don't you do that? And it boils down to they haven't taken the time to really be able to develop this skill set and develop their ability to communicate and work on these stories. Because if they did, they would get more confidence, they would have more clarity, and with more confidence and more clarity, we take more aggressive action, right? We're willing to do some of the things that we would hesitate from. And so I believe that for everybody, regardless of what your profession is, not only can you benefit from becoming a better communicator, but you will have so much more impact and more stickiness to your ideas and the things that you have to share if you can get better at being able to craft and share powerful, compelling stories. Because those stories have the 3 R's. And I just heard a new friend of mine on Clubhouse share this, but it's the fact that people will remember it, and they're more likely, not only when they remember it, they're likely to repeat it, right? And we think about, you go to a workshop, a seminar, people share frameworks. You may not remember all the frameworks, but you will remember the story. And then finally, will they respond to it? And that's what we want to do. We want to connect with people in such a way that they will respond, that what we have to share with them resonates with them so that they'll actually take action.
So this is another three words that start with the same letter that you can now add to the arsenal. So I think I've seen you describe it, what you do in your academy as discover, develop, and deliver their signature stories or their stories. And this one is good. Remember, repeat, and respond. It's good. There's a lot of power to this alliterations. So I heard Mark Brown, who you might know of, and Mark Brown talks about when he tells people to find stories, he says firsts and lasts, worst and best. And I have another friend, John Zimmer, who says it's your firsts, your fears, your frustrations, and your fiascos. So again, they do a lot for remembering these things. Now, one other thing that I wanted to pick you up on, this is me maybe just having a minor go at you, is you have that questionnaire about what type of storyteller you are. So I kept trying to game the thing to just get you are an amazing storyteller. But the one type that I don't think you described there, and I'm sure you and I know that this type 100% exists, is the reluctant storyteller. Because you describe people as they leave the end, they don't complete the stories, or they are too passionate about it, or there's lots of different types. They're all true, but I was surprised that questionnaire didn't give you options to basically say, I don't really tell stories.
So there's actually one of the ones that are there is the one that we refer to as the juggler. Okay. And AKA the accidental. So we don't necessarily say reluctant, but accidental storyteller. Right. And this is the person that has no intentions of telling the story. If they did start telling a story, Francisco, they don't even realize they're telling a story, and they likely did not finish it up and really put it. Because that juggler or the accidental storyteller, they just literally share whatever comes top of mind. And because of that, they're not ever really intentional about sharing and telling stories. And it's really cool too. Maybe before we end, we'll tell the folks how they could take that storyteller quiz. What's interesting is I love when people take the quiz, because either they go, oh my gosh, that was exactly, or they go, man, that really had me thinking. I didn't realize that. Or they go, I totally disagree with this. No. I love it. Regardless, it serves its purpose of getting people to think that, wait a second, there's probably a way that you're naturally sharing and telling stories right now. And however you're telling your stories, there is room for improvement. You can become a better storyteller. And if you took the time to become a better storyteller, then ultimately you're going to make more impact. And then ultimately, if your goal is also to make more income, that if you make more impact, the byproduct of making more impact is that you'll also make more income.
There's a word you used a few seconds ago, and it's a word I use a lot. So I describe the type of storytelling I do as intentional storytelling, but there is another word that you use, and I used to use it before, which is strategic. And that's something that I think is really important. And if anyone hasn't noticed it yet, we have always talked today about when to use what story for what. So if I understand it correctly, for example, you talk about storytelling and about the power of storytelling. So you have a very specific story that you use to sell that idea to people. I think it's the story of your first job.
Yeah, basically when I got my first job, which was really because of my first car, Francisco. But yes, I literally shared that story specifically just to get people to buy into the importance of storytelling.
Yeah, so for the people who have not listened to hours and hours of Andy Henriquez, as I have, if I remember the story correctly, it was essentially that your mom let you choose the car you wanted, but didn't give you the keys because you needed to get a job to pay for the insurance.
Absolutely, man.
And you kept trying to get a job in a grocery store, I think, or supermarket, and the guy just wouldn't give you the time of day until you basically gave him a plenty of context and said, no, but this is my mom got the car, and it's the first car, and I told all my friends, I'm looking bad now, man. You need to help me. And then he said, okay, fine. I'll give you a chance.
Yeah. And Francisco, the beautiful thing about that was that It was the fact that when I shared with the store manager, his name was Mr. Olson. And all of the previous times I went to him and I was just like, Mr. Olson, I turned in my application. He told me, come back in a couple of days, come back in a couple of days. But when I finally told him the story, I was like, Mr. Olson, I turned 16 a couple of months ago. I've been begging my mom to buy me a new car. She bought me this black Ford Bronco 2 Eddie Bauer edition, sir. It's sitting in the driveway. She won't let me drive the car. And I was like, Mr. Olson, this is my first car. And then Mr. Olson ended up saying, so like, this is your first car, huh? And then he went down memory lane, Francisco. He started telling me about his first car. He was like, yeah, I had a Chevy Camaro, right? And he told me how he had to work like a newspaper route and do all this extra work to be able to take care of the car and everything. And then it was in that moment is when he said, what'd you say your name was again, young man? And then he walked me over to the stack of applications. And I couldn't believe how here I was 16, Mr. Olson probably in his early 50s. I was like, why is it every other time this guy just told me to come back? But this time he hired me on the spot. And what I realized is that was the first time that I shared the story. And it wasn't that I just shared a story, but it was the fact that that story was something that he could relate to because he could remember his first car. And that created a connection between myself and Mr. Olson that allowed me as a 16-year-old to be able to influence this man that was so much older than me, that we don't look anything alike, that we probably didn't have much in common, but there was a commonality there, which is like the excitement and so forth of just having that first car. And that became a game changer. And when I share that story, I share it so people can understand that a story can separate you from your competition, because the moment before that, I was in a stack of applications competing on the same thing as everybody else who filled out an application. But when I told the story, that allowed me to separate myself from the other applicants, right? The other thing is Mr. Olson took my application, which I didn't realize so many people applied to be employed at this grocery store. He took my application from the very bottom of all these applications and he put it on the top. So what I realized is a story can take you from being last of consideration to top of consideration. In other words, story can take you from being at the bottom to being at the absolute top. And how many of us would like to be first of mind in our industry with our customers and our clients? And then the final thing is how stories allow you to be able to influence people to be able to say yes. And I was able to influence Mr. Olson finally to say yes. All the previous times being persistent wasn't enough. But when I shared the story, that finally was the turning point that allowed me to influence Mr. Olson to say yes. And so that was a major game changer. But I share that story for one reason only, and that is to get the audience to say, you know what? That is right. Stories do allow you to connect with people. Stories can allow you to influence. Stories can separate. You know what? Man, maybe I need to start telling more stories, And if I could get them simply thinking that, then that story has done its job.
Andy, I think it's pretty clear that you've done all right for yourself and you learn how to tell some stories. But I think your mom did you a disservice by giving you that car, because if she had bought the car for herself and you had to borrow it, your storytelling skills would have improved much faster, because you need the story for why you borrowed. You need the story of why it's returned without gas, and then you need the story for why it's crashed or totaled.
Absolutely, man. I would have had to come up with stories like every single week to try to figure out a way to borrow my mom's car, man. Very good point, Francisco.
All right, Andy. If people want to get more of your content or reach out to you, what's the best place for them to find? I know you're everywhere, but where's the best place?
Yeah, so absolutely. So they can connect with me if they're on Instagram. I'm at Show Up For Your Life. And then everywhere else, I'm at Andy Henriquez. So just on Instagram, I'm at Show Up For Your Life. On Facebook, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, everywhere else, I'm at Andy Henriquez, my full name. And I know some of the folks, if you don't mind, Francisco, too, if anybody's curious and they want to take the quiz, I could tell them where they can take the quiz as well. All right, so perfect. So if anybody wants to take the quiz and figure out what your storytelling style is, there's basically 5 different storytelling styles. We all naturally have a storytelling style. And the cool thing is, there's parts of the way that you're telling a story that's working for you, and there might be some parts that you can improve. And so if you're curious, you can go do one of two things. I'll make it easy for you. You can just text the word story to 954-278-3701. I'm going to say that again. You're going to text the word story to 954-278-3701. So once you initiate that text, it is going to ask you what's your name as well as your email. You're going to receive a text response that gives you a link to be able to take the quiz as well as an email. So once again, you could text the word story to 954-278-3701. And if you happen to have issues with that and you're like, man, I don't know how to do this text thing, you can just go to storytellerquiz.com. Storytellerquiz.com. Either way, it's going to take you right there. And by the way, if you happen to take the quiz, reach out, let us know, let Francisco know what your quiz results were. Let us know if you like, oh man, I totally disagree. I'm not a reporter. I'm not evangelist. Or you're like, you know what, man, this is a pretty good point. I do realize, I happen to be this style and I got some good nuggets from that. So we're looking forward to hearing back from you on that.
It's such an American thing, the whole text award. I don't think they do that in Europe or anywhere else. I'm always baffled, like why would someone want to text and not just go to the website? But maybe it's an old school thing where people do, because I've had other people that do this work that are based in the US as well, and everybody has like a text thing, and people in Europe are like, what? Text awards.
Yeah, I remember the first time, Francisco, I remember the first time I spoke in Europe. I ended up getting an international number to do that. And even then, but I can tell you right now, for me, the reason why is that typically, and you know this, Francisco, from the stage, when we're trying to, let's say, give somebody a free training or a resource like we just did, they have a tendency to just write down the website. And then I don't know what the percentage is, but I would argue that probably less than 30% will remember after the fact to do it. So typically when I'm on stage, I will actually have them pull out their cell phones on the spot and have them do it. And I actually would give something away to the first person who actually comes and shows me that they got the link. And we do that because what we have found is that if I'm speaking in front of an audience, a couple hundred or thousands of people, the response that I could get via text and getting them, the key is not just the text, it's the key is that they're doing it right in that moment. We find gets a much bigger response than here's a website, because let's face it, how many of them remember to go back to the website to go do it? Very small percentage.
Yeah, I think this idea of telling people to just get their phone out. I remember when I started in financial services, I had this manager who was a great salesperson, and he would say, you want to get referrals, right? So you want to know who their friends are. But before you ask them anything, just say, can you just do me a favor, Andy? Can you just get your phone out? And you sort of automatically get it out, and you go, okay, can you just go into your contacts now? And you kind of, yes. And before you know it, you're like in there already, and it's kind of awkward to go, well, I don't know anyone. Joe, I can see.
Yeah, Joe right here, right? Joe. Oh, what about Deborah? Okay, good.
Yeah, it definitely works. Sorry, and your website is andyhenriquez.com, right?
andyhenriquez.com.
Okay, perfect. Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. The painting guys, I don't think they got nothing on you. You managed to rise above the guys painting the outside of your house or whatever the hell they were doing there.
Yeah. I'm in a condo, Francisco. The funniest thing, man, a condo, there are literally 12 floors to this condo and hundreds of units. And out of all of the units to be right outside of, to be doing the window and scraping and painting, they chose mine. But this is the beauty of what we get to do, right? We have to learn how to be able to still push through regardless of what the distractions are. And it's so funny because I'm right next to the window and I'm looking at this guy plastered and he sees me speaking and he could tell I'm obviously doing something, but nah, he's like, I'm just going to do my job anyway.
And this is no coincidence, man. The people realize that you're giving power to the people. So now maybe expect every single interview or podcast you get for them to do some works just outside your window. We have to stop that Andy Henriquez guy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
getting
yeah.
out there.
It's out of control, man. He's pouring into the people, man. He's getting them to share and tell their stories.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much for your time again, Andy. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Francisco, man. Thank you so much for having me, man. I had a blast, and it's awesome, man, to be here, man. Hope everybody listening in got some value.
I'm sure they did. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.